The late Tuesday moon hung low over Havenwood, Georgia, casting long, inky shadows across the quiet, tree-lined streets. For Sergeant Olivia Vance, it was just another night settling into a comfortable rhythm. Olivia wasn't your typical sergeant anymore, not in the uniform sense anyway. These days, her battles were fought on different fronts. She was a woman in her early 40s, with eyes that held the depth of countless sunrises and a quiet strength that hummed beneath her composed exterior. Most folks in Havenwood knew her as the dedicated volunteer at the local community shelter, the one who always had a kind word, or the patient mentor who spent her evenings helping at-risk youth find their footing. Her life was rooted in service, in the belief that every person deserved a chance, a voice, a fair shake. Tonight, she was humming along to an old jazz tune, tired but content after a marathon charity event to raise funds for homeless veterans. The road ahead, a familiar stretch of highway bordering the town's industrial park, seemed to promise a smooth, uneventful ride home. But sometimes, the most serene moments are just the calm before the storm. Suddenly, in her rearview mirror, the night erupted in a blinding flash of blue and red. A single police cruiser, its lights piercing the darkness, was directly behind her. Olivia's hand instinctively went to the turn signal. She pulled over immediately, smoothly, efficiently, just as she'd been trained to do countless times, though never from this side of the window. Her heart gave a curious little thump, not of fear, but of mild annoyance. Had she missed a speed limit sign? Perhaps a taillight was out? She took a deep, steadying breath, preparing her license and registration. Always be prepared. Always be calm. It was a mantra that had guided her through far more turbulent moments in life. The officer who approached her window was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a confident, almost cocky stride. His name, Officer Derek Cole, gleamed on his name tag. His initial words were polite enough, almost disarmingly so. "Evening, ma'am. Do you know why I pulled you over?" Olivia, maintaining eye contact, calmly stated, "No, officer, I'm afraid I don't." His smirk, barely perceptible, twisted. "You were loitering in a restricted area." Olivia frowned slightly. "Officer, this is Highway 17. It's a main thoroughfare, and I was driving, not loitering." The air in the car seemed to thicken. The polite facade had vanished, replaced by an aggressive, almost accusatory tone. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, ma'am." Cole snapped, his voice now laced with an edge. "I asked you a question. What were you doing in a restricted area?" And then came the first real red flag, a chilling detail that seasoned listeners will recognize instantly. A truth many have faced in their own terrifying encounters. Officer Cole, without being prompted, suddenly tapped his chest camera. "Just so you know, my body cam decided to act up tonight." Typical. A quick, almost imperceptible gesture, but Olivia's finely tuned senses picked it up. A malfunction. Convenient, wouldn't you say? It was an unspoken declaration. Your word against mine. The terrifying reality for so many, the knowledge that the digital eye, meant to be a silent witness, had suddenly gone blind. The conversation rapidly devolved. Cole's accusations grew wilder, more outlandish. "You're resisting, ma'am. You're being disorderly." His voice rose, echoing in the quiet night. He demanded she step out of the car, slamming his hand on the roof, making her vehicle shudder. "Get out of the car now, or I will use force." Olivia's composure, though internally tested, held firm. She kept her hands clearly visible, her movements slow and deliberate. She understood the power dynamic, the terrifying vulnerability of being a woman, alone, at night, facing a visibly agitated officer with a malfunctioning camera. Every fiber of her being screamed to remain calm, to not give him even the slightest excuse. He tried to explain again, calmly, logically, "Officer, I am cooperating. I have done nothing wrong." But her words were met with disdain. He reached inside her car, grabbing her arm with a force that surprised her. "You think you're above the law, lady? You think you don't have to listen?" He yanked, trying to pull her from the driver's seat. Olivia, despite the shock and pain, remained perfectly still, her muscles tensed, not resisting but bracing. It was a terrifying dance, a silent struggle of wills where one side held all the apparent power. How quickly a seemingly innocuous stop can spiral into a nightmare, where an officer's unchecked authority becomes a weapon, and an innocent person's world is turned upside down. This wasn't about a broken taillight. This wasn't about loitering. This was about power. And for a fleeting, chilling moment, Olivia understood the silent terror so many in her community felt when faced with a situation just like this. Her composure, the very thing that protected her, would later be twisted into a weapon against her. "Oh, wait." Entered 8 hours. Little did Officer Cole know the quiet woman he saw as an easy target had faced far greater threats than a deserted industrial park at night. He had no idea the silent warrior within her was simply biding her time. This was just the beginning, and the battlefield was about to shift. From the lonely highway to the cold, unforgiving chambers of a courtroom, where one woman's unwavering truth would soon begin to unravel, a carefully woven web of lies. The fluorescent hum of the Havenwood County Courthouse felt like a stark, cold contrast to the silent, humid night where Olivia's ordeal began. It was a place designed to intimidate, its polished floors and austere benches whispering of solemn judgments and weighty pronouncements. For Olivia, now facing fabricated charges of resisting arrest and disorderly conduct, the very accusations Officer Cole had hurled at her on the highway, it was a battlefield she never anticipated. She met attorney Julian Reed for the first time in a cramped consultation room, smelling faintly of old paper and anxiety. Julian was sharp, clearly intelligent but young, perhaps only a few years out of law school. His dark suit, though impeccably pressed, seemed to hang a little loosely on his frame, hinting at the nervous energy that buzzed around him. He shuffled through a thin file, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Given the officer's testimony, the lack of your own recording, and frankly the department's unwavering support for Officer Cole, a plea bargain might be our safest option." He looked at her, his gaze earnest, almost pleading. "It could mean a lighter sentence, community service, avoiding a public trial. Facing a police officer's word in court without hard evidence is an uphill battle. A near impossible one sometimes." Olivia listened, her expression unreadable. She understood the pragmatism, the bleak reality Julian was presenting. But pragmatism was a concept she respected in tactical situations, not when it came to her integrity. She looked him directly in the eye, her voice calm but unwavering, a steel undertone that surprised even Julian. "Julian," she said, using his first name with a quiet authority that instantly commanded his attention, "I will not concede to a lie, not for 1 second. I did nothing wrong, and I will not plead guilty to a crime I did not commit." Julian blinked, taken aback. He saw not just defiance, but an unshakable resolve that hinted at something deeper. It was a resolve forged not in a courtroom, but in fires he couldn't yet comprehend. Fires he couldn't yet comprehend. This wasn't just a client, this was a force. The courtroom, on the day of the preliminary hearing, was a theater of carefully constructed deception. Officer Derek Cole took the stand, impeccably dressed in his crisp uniform, exuding an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His testimony was a chilling masterclass in fabrication. He recounted in vivid, almost theatrical detail Olivia's aggression, her verbal abuse, her physical resistance. He described her as a danger who had made sudden aggressive movements towards him, forcing him to act decisively to maintain order and ensure public safety. His voice was steady, his eyes unwavering as he looked at the judge. Judge Evelyn Hayes, a stern-faced woman with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. The prosecutor, Alan Graves, a seasoned veteran with a silver tongue, skillfully guided Cole through his narrative, painting Olivia as a volatile threat, and Cole as a diligent officer, simply doing his duty in the face of unprovoked hostility. The narrative was tight, believable, and utterly false. From the defense table, Olivia watched Cole with an almost scientific detachment. Her gaze wasn't one of anger or fear, but of intense analysis. She wasn't just hearing his words, she was dissecting his performance. She noted the subtle twitch at the corner of his mouth when he delivered a particularly egregious lie, the almost imperceptible shift in his weight, the way his eyes would momentarily dart towards the prosecutor after a key statement, seeking reassurance. These weren't the tells of a nervous witness. They were the polished movements of a man rehearsed in his deception. She was reading him like a map, a landscape of deceit laid bare through his nervous energy and practiced confidence. She knew the truth, and she knew the weight of his lies. When it was Julian's turn for cross-examination, he tried. He poked holes where he could, highlighting the absence of any other witnesses, the sudden malfunction of the body camera. "Officer Cole," Julian asked, his voice wavering slightly, "you claim Miss Vance made aggressive movements, yet there is no video evidence, no other witnesses. We have only your word. How often in your decade on the force has your body camera malfunctioned during a critical incident?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Equipment malfunctions happen, counselor. This was one of them." He stuck to his story with rigid conviction. Without tangible proof, Julian's questions, though sharp, seemed to bounce off Cole's solid wall of fabricated certainty. Judge Hayes, while listening attentively, seemed swayed by Cole's unwavering testimony. The scale of justice felt heavily tilted. For many in the audience, particularly those who understood the brutal reality of the system, this was a familiar, heartbreaking scene, the powerful word of an officer against the silent, unrecorded truth of a civilian. It was a common trap, one that ensnared countless individuals who simply found themselves on the wrong side of an unchecked authority, their voices silenced, their lives irrevocably altered. This was a pattern of injustice, played out daily in courtrooms across the nation. But Olivia Vance was not just any civilian, and her silence would soon become the most powerful testimony of all. The game was set, the board tilted, but the true players had yet to show their hand. The web of lies was woven, but a single thread of truth was about to emerge, ready to unravel everything. The courtroom was about to witness a revelation that would shift the very foundations of the trial, leading to a clash not just of testimonies, but of fundamental beliefs. The air in the courtroom hung heavy, thick with the lingering scent of Officer Cole's confident deception. The judge had called for Olivia Vance to take the stand, and as she rose from the defense table, a subtle shift occurred. She didn't rush, didn't falter. Her movements were measured, deliberate, almost practiced. A quiet intensity seemed to radiate from her, silencing the murmurs in the gallery, drawing every eye. When she finally took her seat, her posture was ramrod straight, her gaze steady, commanding the room's attention even before a single word left her lips. Attorney Julian Reed approached the stand, his earlier nervousness now replaced by a budding confidence, almost as if he too sensed the impending shift in the trial's tide. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice clear and steady, "you've heard the accusations against you? Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, attempting to seize a weapon. Are these accusations true?" Olivia's voice was firm, resonating clearly across the silent room. "No, they are not." Julian nodded, then let the words hang in the air for a moment. "Then let's talk about what really happened that night." In your own words. Tell the court how your encounter with Officer Cole unfolded." Olivia took a slow breath, her gaze sweeping the room, meeting Julian's before settling on the judge. "That night," she began, her voice calm and controlled, "I was heading home after a long evening at a charity event. I was driving on Highway 17 as I always do. Officer Cole approached my vehicle, stated I was loitering, a claim I immediately refuted. When he asked for my identification, I provided it. When he asked what I was doing, I told him. When he asked me to exit my vehicle, I complied." She paused, her eyes briefly flicking towards Cole, who visibly stiffened in his seat. "I asked why I was being pulled over, what I had done wrong. He accused me of being uncooperative. When I tried to explain myself further, he grabbed my arm and refused to let go, despite me telling him I hadn't done anything wrong." Julian took a step closer to the jury, his voice rising slightly, injecting just the right amount of incredulity. "Did you threaten him in any way, Miss Vance? Did you make any aggressive movements?" Olivia's answer was immediate and firm. "No, I simply asked him to release my arm. When I attempted to gently pull away, he shoved me against my own vehicle and handcuffed me. He then accused me of reaching for his weapon, which is a complete fabrication." Murmurs rippled through the gallery, growing louder this time. But Olivia wasn't finished. "His actions weren't about law enforcement," she continued, her voice steady but charged with a quiet, undeniable emotion. "They were about control, about asserting power over someone he assumed couldn't fight back." Julian paused, letting her powerful words hang in the air. "Miss Vance," Julian continued, drawing a collective intake of breath from the room, "there's been a lot of speculation about your background. The prosecution has painted you as an ordinary civilian who suddenly turned violent. Is there more to your story that the court should know?" Olivia's eyes met Julian's, and for the first time her calm exterior gave way to a flicker of something deeper. Resolve, immense strength, and perhaps a hint of righteous anger. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. "There is more." The room held its collective breath. Olivia leaned forward slightly, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the stand. The silence was suffocating, every ear strained. "I am Sergeant Olivia Vance," she announced, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade, strong and clear. "United States Army, 22 years of service, retired, airborne ranger." A collective gasp ripped through the courtroom, followed by a stunned, disbelieving silence. Even Judge Hayes seemed momentarily taken aback, her gavel frozen in midair. Officer Cole's face turned a pale, sickly green, his jaw tightening as if he were physically holding back a visceral reaction. The prosecutor, Alan Graves, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Julian stepped forward, his voice now resonating with conviction. "Miss Vance, as an airborne ranger, you were trained to handle high-pressure, life-or-math situations. Did you use any of that training during your encounter with Officer Cole?" Olivia answered without hesitation. "Yes, I used it to stay calm, to de-escalate the situation, and to protect myself from harm without resorting to violence. My training is about discipline, precision, and control, qualities I carry with me every day." "And did you at any point attempt to harm Officer Cole or reach for his weapon?" Julian pressed, knowing the answer was a nail in Cole's coffin. "No," Olivia said, her voice firm. "My training taught me how to assess threats and respond appropriately. Officer Cole was not a threat to my safety. He was a threat to my dignity, and I refused to let him strip me of that." The courtroom erupted once more, louder this time, as the weight of Olivia's words settled over the room. The murmurs weren't of disbelief now, but of awe and outrage. Judge Hayes banged her gavel repeatedly, her face a mixture of frustration and a dawning respect. "Order!" I will have order in this court." When the noise subsided, Julian turned to the jury, his voice steady, now brimming with undeniable conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard Officer Cole's version of events, a tale woven from fabrications and assumptions, and now you've heard the truth. From a woman who has spent her life defending this country, a decorated veteran who embodies discipline and integrity." He gestured towards Olivia. "The question you need to ask yourselves is simple. Who do you believe?" Prosecutor Graves remained seated, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. Cole stared straight ahead, his hands clenched tightly on the arms of his chair. As Olivia stepped down from the stand, the weight of her testimony lingered in the room, a powerful, undeniable force. She returned to her seat, her head held high, and leaned towards Julian. "Now," she said softly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Let's see how long that wall holds." The tension in the courtroom was almost suffocating. The silent warrior had awakened, and her truth had just delivered the first devastating blow to the edifice of lies. The battle was far from over, but the tide had undeniably turned. The courtroom was a frozen tableau, the aftershocks of Olivia's revelations still rippling through the stunned silence. Officer Cole, once a picture of smug confidence, now looked like a man teetering on the edge of a crumbling cliff. His face was pale, glistening with the sheen of sweat, and the faint tremor in his hands gripping the table betrayed his rapidly dissolving composure. His fellow officers, who had lined the back row in a silent show of support for their comrade, now exchanged uneasy glances, doubt creeping into their minds like unwelcome shadows. Even Judge Hayes, typically stoic and detached, leaned forward slightly as though sensing the tide turning in ways even she hadn't anticipated. At the defense table, Olivia sat unmoving, her composure a stark contrast to Cole's unraveling. Her quiet strength filled the room more effectively than any words could. Beside her, Julian Carter, his jaw now set in determination, flipped through his notes one last time. This wasn't just a case to him anymore. It was a reckoning. Judge Hayes cleared her throat, breaking the tense silence. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice carrying a note of caution, "the defense may proceed." Julian stood, buttoning his jacket before addressing the court. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but authoritative, "the defense has one final piece of evidence to present. Evidence that will leave no doubt as to what truly happened on the night of my client's arrest." The gallery buzzed with whispers, spectators craning their necks. Cole shifted uncomfortably, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. Prosecutor Alan Graves visibly tensed, his earlier confidence replaced with wary suspicion. Olivia remained still, her gaze steady, as Julian retrieved a file from his briefcase. He held it aloft for the jury to see. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady but firm, "what you've heard in this courtroom over the past few days is a tale of two stories. Officer Cole would have you believe that my client, a woman with no prior criminal record, and a career dedicated to serving her country, suddenly became violent and aggressive for no reason. But the truth is far simpler and far more troubling." Julian opened the file and pulled out a series of documents. "This," he said, holding up the first page, "is Officer Cole's personnel record, and what it reveals is a pattern of behavior that speaks to his credibility, or rather, his lack of it." Prosecutor Graves leaped to his feet. "Your Honor, I object. This is irrelevant to the case at hand." Judge Hayes raised a hand to silence him. "Overruled, Mr. Carter. You may continue." Julian nodded and addressed the jury directly, his voice gaining power. "Over the course of his career, Officer Cole has been the subject of multiple complaints: excessive force, racial bias, improper conduct. These complaints were either ignored or buried by the department. But today, they come to light. He handed copies of the documents to the jury, who studied them intently. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, and even the judge's expression darkened as she scanned the pages in front of her. "Let me be clear," Julian said, his voice rising slightly. "This is not just about one bad decision. This is about a pattern of abuse, a pattern that culminated in the false arrest and mistreatment of my client." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room, before turning toward Olivia. "And now, it's time for her to speak her truth." Olivia rose slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She walked to the front of the courtroom, standing tall and commanding as she addressed the jury. "My name is Sergeant Olivia Vance," she began, her voice clear and steady. "For 22 years, I served in the United States Army as an airborne ranger. I've been to places most people can't imagine, faced dangers most people will never know, and through it all, I've held myself to the highest standards of integrity and discipline." Her eyes swept over the jury, each word carrying the weight of her experience. "I have faced enemies on the battlefield," she continued, her voice unwavering. "But I never thought I would face one in my own country. That night, I wasn't a threat. I wasn't breaking any laws. I was simply existing, something that for people like me often feels like a crime in itself." The gallery was silent now, the earlier murmurs replaced by a palpable sense of shame and reflection. Olivia continued, her voice unwavering. "Officer Cole didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a target, a means to assert his power and control. But what he didn't see was my strength, my resolve, and my refusal to be silenced." She turned to face Cole directly, her gaze piercing. "You underestimated me, Officer Cole. But more importantly, you underestimated the truth. And the truth has a way of coming to light." Cole looked away, his face flushed with humiliation. The jury's eyes followed Olivia, their expressions a mixture of awe and anger. Not at her, but at the system that had allowed this to happen. Olivia turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I fought for this country. I fought for justice. And I'm here today to fight not just for myself, but for every person who has ever been wronged by those sworn to protect them." The room erupted into applause, despite the judge's gavel striking repeatedly. "Order!" Judge Hayes barked, though even she couldn't hide the respect in her eyes as she looked at Olivia. Julian stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, Sergeant Vance. No further questions." As Olivia returned to her seat, the energy in the courtroom shifted. The jury looked at her with newfound respect, their earlier skepticism replaced by conviction. Cole, on the other hand, seemed to shrink in his chair, his earlier bravado now a distant memory. Judge Hayes leaned forward, her voice heavy with finality. "We will now move to closing arguments, and I suggest both parties choose their words carefully." The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. The tension was thick, the silence heavy. The system had begun to unravel, thread by thread, exposing the dark patterns hidden beneath the surface. And, as the closing arguments loomed, it became clear that this wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning, a moment where the quiet strength of one woman was about to demand justice, not just for herself, but for countless others. The courtroom was heavy with silence, as Prosecutor Alan Graves rose to deliver his closing argument. He adjusted his tie nervously, the carefully curated demeanor he had worn earlier now showing distinct signs of strain. He approached the jury, his usual sharp confidence replaced with a strained composure. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graves began, his voice measured but lacking its earlier vigor. "What we've seen here today is a complex case. While the defense has worked hard to paint Officer Cole as a man with a questionable record, I urge you to consider the broader picture. Law enforcement officers make split-second decisions every day, often under difficult circumstances. Officer Cole believes he was acting in the best interest of public safety. He paused, his gaze flickering toward Cole, whose face was a pale mask of unease. Mistakes may have been made, Graves admitted, the concession hanging heavy in the air, but that does not change the fact that Officer Cole was doing his job. The defense's claims, while compelling, do not erase the fact that the defendant questioned authority, resisted an officer, and escalated the situation. Graves's tone hardened as he finished. I ask you to consider the facts and not be swayed by emotion or spectacle. Thank you. The courtroom remained silent as he returned to his seat. Julian Carter rose next, his movements deliberate and calm. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his tie, and approached the jury with an air of quiet, unshakable confidence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Julian began, his voice steady and firm. What we've seen here today is not a complex case. It is, in fact, painfully simple. My client, Sergeant Olivia Vance, a decorated airborne ranger and an American hero, was profiled, mistreated, and lied about by a man who abused his power. He turned, gesturing toward Olivia, who sat with her back straight, her hands resting lightly on the table. Olivia Vance did not resist arrest. She did not threaten Officer Cole. What she did was ask a question, a simple, reasonable question. Why? And for that, she was thrown against her car, handcuffed and humiliated. Julian's voice rose, his passion filling the room. This isn't just about Olivia Vance. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that those who wear a badge and swear an oath to protect and serve are held to the highest standards of integrity. Because when they fail to do so, the entire system fails. He took a step closer to the jury, lowering his voice for emphasis. Today, you have the power to send a message that no one, not even an officer of the law, is above accountability. That justice is not just a word we say, but a principle we uphold. Julian returned to his seat, and the courtroom fell into a heavy silence as Judge Hayes gave her instructions to the jury. Then they were dismissed to deliberate. The hours felt like days. Olivia sat in the courthouse hallway, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Julian paced back and forth, his brow furrowed in thought. The low hum of conversation from nearby spectators and reporters filled the space, but Olivia tuned it all out. Do you think they'll see the truth? Julian asked, breaking the silence. Olivia looked up at him, her expression calm but resolute. They don't need to see it, Julian. They need to feel it. The truth has a way of making itself known. Julian nodded, though his nerves were evident. Before either of them could say more, the bailiff appeared in the doorway. The jury has reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed as everyone filed back in, the tension almost unbearable. Olivia stood beside Julian at the defense table, her face an unreadable mask. Across the room, Cole sat stiffly, his eyes fixed on the jury box. The foreperson of the jury, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a serious expression, stood as the judge addressed her. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor, she replied, her voice steady. Judge Hayes nodded. Please read the verdict. The foreperson unfolded a piece of paper and began, In the case of State v. Olivia Vance, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges. A wave of emotion rippled through the room. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few quiet cheers broke out before the judge gavel brought order. Olivia exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. Julian placed a hand on her shoulder, a smile breaking through his otherwise professional demeanor. The foreperson continued. Furthermore, we, the jury, strongly recommend that an investigation into Officer Cole's conduct be pursued. Judge Hayes nodded gravely. The court will take this recommendation under advisement. Officer Cole, I suggest you retain counsel. This matter is far from over. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. But Olivia stood tall, her presence commanding as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just my victory," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "This is a victory for accountability, for justice, and for everyone who has ever been silenced by those in power. I didn't fight this battle alone, and I won't stop fighting for others." Julian stood beside her, watching with a mixture of pride and admiration. The crowd erupted into applause as Olivia turned and walked away, leaving the cameras behind. Months later, Officer Derek Cole was dismissed from the police force and faced criminal charges for perjury and misconduct. His fellow officers, once loyal to him, distanced themselves as the investigation uncovered more of his abuses. Olivia returned to her quiet life, but her name became a symbol of resilience and justice. She was invited to speak at events, her story inspiring others to stand up against injustice. Though she had left the battlefield years ago, Olivia Vance knew that her fight wasn't over, and she was ready for whatever came next, because for her, justice wasn't just an outcome, it was a way of life. And just like that, the truth prevailed. A courageous woman stood her ground, exposing lies and demanding justice in a system designed to silence her. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think, made you feel, then please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the incredible human spirit. Your support helps us amplify these crucial stories. Thank you for listening.